Hi, we are live in the intimacy of race, presenting Coffee and Conversations with Julie Serot. And I'm just going to take a moment to see if I am able to start a watch party here from my phone. And it doesn't look like it. So we're just going to head on with what we have. So welcome, Julie. Welcome to Coffee and Conversations. I just want to read your bio a little bit so people can know a little bit about you. So Julie is the founder of the Dharma Circle and a success coach for female entrepreneurs. Excuse me, I think I have to sneeze. I think I breathed in too much peppermint, Julie.
That was my sneeze.
So Julie works with women who are looking to identify their fulfilling and juicy life purpose that also brings them abundance and joy, as well as helping high performers who have already achieved success with their businesses to create more alignment in their lives and businesses. So I'm really so excited to have you on Coffee and Conversations. Welcome.
So happy to be here. This conversation's been a long time coming with us. So I've been putting a lot of thought and intention into this conversation, as far as some things that have been coming up for me that I'd love to land. And also I want to also acknowledge, the today, the timing of today.
Yeah.
September 11th.
Yes.
And what that means. And I don't think this is not connected to that. So I'll speak into that in a minute. But before I do, I just want to say, Eva, thank you for having me here and for creating this series. And it's very valuable. So I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's always been my intention to create a safe space for us to have these intimate conversations, because the fear, the guilt, shame, pain, grief, trauma, and avoidance that comes from not having these conversations is not going to work to bring us closer together. And so, sometimes these conversations are not comfortable. They're not pleasant to have, but they are facing a reality. And, just like with any breakdown, the only way out is through. And so these are meant to have these breakthroughs. So thank you for referencing 9/11, as someone who was in New York that day and lost some patients and friends in the towers, and knew a lot of people who shared stories of escaping. It's not lost on me, the significance of this day, and just how humans bringing pain to other humans is something that for me, I would never understand how we can hurt one another.
Yeah.
That so pardon me. So how I want to really ask you, the first thing I want to ask you is, what came up for you, or what did you feel when you witnessed, George Floyd's death? Because that was a catalyst for what we are now experiencing. And it happened when we all were dealing with the lockdown and COVID and isolation and fear and a bunch of other things. And then we were all able to witness this because most of us were still at home with the news. So, witnessing his murder and the ensuing protests afterwards, what did you feel as a person of a non-Black person to see that happen to a man of color?
Yeah, good question. The first thing I felt was denial. Really? That can't possibly have happened. That sense of, surely there must be a misunderstanding, because this is too out of control for me to take in as truth. And of course it was. And then what came up for me was, how is it possible that, why? Just confusion.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very similar to what you just said. I can't fathom how another, a being could inflict pain on another being in that way. I just confusion.
Mm-hmm.
And also subsequent to that, something that came up as the race conversation emerged was shame. and guilt, as well as a sense of, I have no idea what to do or where to go from here. And
Mm.
at the same time, I'm committed to doing something. And at the same time, I know I can't do nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I hear you with that because, I avoided watching it for a long time. And I'll tell you why, because I have seen so many videos of Black men being murdered by the police. And my first instinct was, here's another one.
Right.
And it wasn't, I guess you could describe it as being numb to it in the Black community. We're not surprised. We're not shocked.
Mm-hmm.
But there was something about the depraved indifference for human life and the manner in which this man was murdered while people begging this officer to stop was heart-wrenching. And it brought up a level of, I believe it's ancestral grief and pain that I had never experienced before. And I mean, literally, I'm not a crier. You can, ask my children. I'm like, Ma, you cry? Like, really? Like, yeah, I do. But for about 3 or 4 nights in a row, I
Yeah.
cried myself to sleep over that because it was just like the inhumanity of it
Right.
was very shocking. And so, I was shocked at my reaction and of the level of pain and grief that came up in me. And I knew that I couldn't do business as usual. I had to do something. And that was the birth of this particular Facebook group. Like, I got to do something.
That actually was another feeling I had was, there was a few things I wanted to launch. There was a few things that were in the pipeline as far as like the business and the camp. And I just knew it was like an instinctive feeling, like that's not happening anymore on that same timeline, like later maybe, but that's not going to happen right now anymore. And I know that no judgment, like I know there's plenty of people who just kept business as usual, and that's up to them, but that didn't feel right for me. And so I very much disengaged from business as usual and shifted my focus. And as you know, I was doing nearly daily public conversations on Facebook with Black friends to really give them a platform, some of which went viral, which is awesome. But
I actually didn't know that, Julie, to be honest with you. I did not, Facebook kind of censors what you get to see.
Yeah.
And I think we were all in like, okay, what can I do? Well,
Right.
I missed that. So share with me a little bit about that.
Well, it was very supportive. I received a lot of feedback. I think it went viral because it was like every single one of the conversations was shared so much.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think they really struck a chord for people, and I was really intentional in who I chose to have these public conversations with. And just to rewind for a second, the context was I clearly have a lot of learning to do. I'm going to be having these conversations anyway. I just want to bring other people into the conversation to be a part of it so that it's not just me learning by myself, and that like more people can learn with me together. Most of the conversations were me listening. I didn't do a lot of talking, and it was really hearing the point of view of each of these individuals, men and women, in their experience, in their thoughts, in their opinions, and everyone had a very distinct point of view, and it was beautiful and very, very helpful. And I feel like I will never be the same person again, and I had other conversations that were private, that were behind closed doors, that those people preferred to, I had one conversation with a Black woman who's a retired cop. That was a very enlightening conversation. I had another conversation with a woman who specifically moved to a community in the country who is more affluent Black people, because she and her family didn't feel safe or comfortable. Like crazy things happened when they're affluent, but they couldn't be in an affluent white community. Like what? Like wow, and stuff like that. And so some of those were more behind closed doors, but yeah, it was a very I had so many aha moments I could share, but it sort of was a catalyst for me to experience that.
So what was your biggest aha moment? Because that was something I did want to ask you.
Yeah. It's hard to choose one.
Well, a couple.
There was one thing that was very forefront to me that I want to make sure to be able to mention, and that was a conversation you and I had. And I said something about I'm a stand for equality, and you interrupted me and you said, no, it's not about equality, it's about inclusion.
Mm.
And I don't know if I even fully absorbed it then, but I kept thinking about that a lot. And what I even like, do I even understand what that means? I would love to even talk more about that here because I've been thinking about it a lot, and I'm like, I don't even know in the context of like your experience or another Black person's experience, what does that mean specifically for you or for them? Because if that's distinct from equality, like I didn't know that, you
Mm.
know, so that was a big one, and it continues to
Yeah,
be.
yeah.
Um,
You have diversity, you have equity, which is equality, and then you have inclusion. And so, everyone has equal opportunity. And that is, why we live in America, because everybody has equal opportunity. But do they really? So if we're all equal, there was a meme or a post that I put in the Intimacy of Race where everybody is on kind of looking over a fence at, I think, a baseball game, and they're on like a crate, and everybody's standing on the same crate, but everybody's a different height. So the smaller person is standing on the crate, still can't see over the fence. The next taller person standing on the crate barely sees over the fence. And then the taller person standing on the crate can really see everything. But they have equality. They all are given the same size crate. But when you're talking about having that inclusion, well, clearly the one that's smaller is more disadvantaged. He's going to need a taller crate to be able to see at the same advantage as the taller person. And so you are specifically adjusting the opportunity to be more inclusive of people that may have a certain type of disadvantage based on, in that particular case, the example was height.
hmm.
And so does that make it any more sense? Yeah, it's all,
Very
well,
visual, so that actually really lands.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, it helps land because, well, the tall guy, that crate is the perfect height for him. And so when you look at privilege in that way, yeah, he can see. But what about the shorter person that doesn't have the height advantage? What can we do so that we include him to be able to see over the fence? So, yeah, the crate has to be higher.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's helpful. Super helpful. Another aha moment I had was so like another thing that came up for me subsequent to the George Floyd tragedy and everything that occurred was a feeling of like there were a couple things I posted and I received some like backlash for it and I didn't understand because I was doing something out of benevolence and I didn't understand. I just and so I experienced this fear of saying the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like I need to censor myself somehow or edit myself, or maybe I just don't say anything at all because I don't want to say the wrong thing. Well, another aha moment I had from many, like there was one person in particular, Crystal David, our interview was super popular. And she said, you know what, you get to have the backlash. You
Yeah.
get to make the mistakes and whatever backlash comes with that. Like that gets to be part of your process because like everyone's figuring out their way through this.
Mm-hmm.
And not doing something for the fear of backlash also doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of, and I received that a very similar reflection from many people that, you know what, just embrace the backlash. I know it doesn't feel good, but also like years of oppression don't feel good. So you get to have a little bit of backlash as you're navigating this. Just like, I mean, not to be condescending to me, but
It's a trust the process, Julie.
for
It's
sure.
really part of the process is saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong
Yeah.
thing, making
Yeah.
a mistake, and doing nothing is creating safety. And as a person of privilege, merely by the color of your skin, you have that option, of course. And even, there are a lot of people in the Black community that have been silent too because the pain is just too hard to bear. Everybody has that choice, but when you think about what is your intention, is your intention to grow and learn and have an impact and make a difference for justice and equality, or or not. And so when you have that commitment, okay, what does that commitment look like? Well, it means that, done is better than perfect. I'm going to
Right.
get there and I'm going to learn by
Yeah,
mistakes. So thank you for pointing that out to me. I didn't realize that. That's
exactly.
the only way you're going to learn and grow. And staying safe means you don't get to have that opportunity to grow in that space. And
Right.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
way out is through, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think it's a great principle for anything and everything, like especially like as entrepreneurs, turning nothing into something, there's mistakes along the way. But somehow, like as I'm not really a perfectionist, and so that hasn't really been the challenge for me, but there was something about this issue where I felt a little extra prickly because I
Mm,
just so badly didn't want to offend someone.
mhm.
But
Yeah.
I think exactly what you're saying. The intention is everything. So, like I did a post for Juneteenth, and a few people commented to make little tweaks, and it was just having the attitude of like exactly what you said. Thank you for the feedback and education and the further information, and then editing it, just being humble, and just
Mhm,
being willing and surrendered, and at the same time, very committed and clear in my intention to keep moving forward and continue the conversation to the best of my ability.
mhm. And what have you been seeing in your communities, whether it's the leadership community or the spiritual community? What is your overall experience of what's been going on in those communities?
I feel like there's a few different paths that people are taking that I have seen. I
Mhm,
think there's the sincere inquiry of, whether it's internal or external, meaning like, doing the reading, the praying, the having conversations like behind closed doors, whether it's the external, like more of an external processing, especially among like the more influencer crowd. So there's like this like authentic and sincere effort, like
mhm,
daily effort. Like I've seen that, and I feel like I should preface, like I don't have any judgments about any of these things. This is just my
mhm.
observation.
Yeah.
So I've seen that. I've seen a complete like, just like not denial, but like avoidance. Or like one of the things I saw, I made sure to address this right away. Like I scheduled a conversation with Crystal David literally the next day after this happened. Like it was important to me to be urgent about it. I
Mhm,
know some people have their time and they need to process, and I get that. And at the same time, I just knew I needed to be urgent about it. So that was the action I took. But I saw some people who kind of like avoided until they started to get a backlash for avoiding. And then
mhm,
by the time they said something, like this tension had been built up, and now they had to apologize for
mhm.
avoiding. And it was like almost even worse than if they had said something initially. And
Yeah.
then there was and kind of like along with that, I've seen this virtue signaling of like, I'm saying the right thing, I'm sharing that I'm doing something, or I'm going to say something, and then back to business as usual. And I don't think virtue signaling is helpful either. I also don't think shaming someone into virtue signaling and shaming someone into taking action works. I saw a lot of that, and that's the third path. Is I saw some people in the spiritual community and in the entrepreneurial community get very passionate and actually like call out culture, and like call out some big name people, and call out various people. And I recently listened to a podcast about this. And I don't think call out culture works either, because now any action that's taken by those people who were called out, it's going to be that virtue signaling. It's coming from shame. And I don't think that's the right energy either.
Mhm,
So, in my opinion, like if someone were to ask me, well, what's the best way to proceed? I turn back to the leadership distinctions. And my question is, well, what am I a stand for in the world? What are you a stand for in the world? And if someone is authentically a stand for transformation and inclusion and all of the things that have a society really work, where people have at least their basic human rights,
yeah.
then we get to authentically ask ourselves, what is the next most important action I can take that's in alignment with that distinction that I stand for. So really like having that conversation and evoking that doesn't mean don't do anything. It means let's do something from alignment, not from shaming someone. So those are some of the things that I saw.
The shaming culture is a little bit different. Oh, there's a little bit different. Is your Facebook on?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. I'm just hearing a little backlash. Okay. And so The shaming culture doesn't work. However, I think people need to be called forth. If you are an influencer, if you are in the leadership space and people are looking to you and watching you for guidance and direction, you have a responsibility in your position to share the stand that you're taking, to put your stake in the ground, to be a stand for transformation, for humanity, for equal treatment. If that is your stand, I'm not telling people how they should stand. Everybody has a right to be for or against, and I'm just going to make that clear. But, you know, be committed to what you're a stand for.
Right.
If you're in a leadership position, if you are leading and influencing a community of people, I feel if you really are about racial justice, equality, and inclusion, and a stand for transformation of the system that was designed to keep certain communities oppressed. The system was designed this way, and it's working just fine. And it's so embedded into how America is that even taking a stand against it, you're viewed as being anti-American. But it's so important if you really have that intention of true transformation of the system so that everyone is treated with equity, inclusion, and equal justice and equal rights. It's your responsibility, or you shouldn't be in a leadership position.
Right.
How you bring that responsibility forth.
Yeah.
And you've got those different methods. So yeah, I mean, some people do shame and call out.
Right.
Maybe, you know, that's their MO. Some people bully, some people are mean. For me personally, the reason I created this group was to not have shame and hate, but to give you an opportunity to listen and learn and make a decision on where you stand. Because I hear a lot, there's so much fear in the white community of losing followers, losing money, losing clients, losing respect, even because of being in a community that really maybe only the privileged can afford to be in. And then when you take a stand against, no, we need to be more inclusive, and you get that backlash. So maybe people stop following you, stop listening to you, stop buying your product or your service, stop hiring you. And so there's that level of fear that comes out that keeps people silent. And I think a lot of the silence is under the guise, and this is just my opinion, under the guise of, I don't want to say the wrong thing. It's also under the guise of, we need to move past this and go back to business as usual. But I think the real, if you were to start really peeling back the layers, is that in order for there to be true transformation, this cannot be glossed over, hidden, forgotten about. It needs to be part of the mission statement. It needs to be part of daily conversation in the forefront. And that guise of moving on, I've said something already, now next, I think there's still a lot of fear of loss. There's loss of authority, there's loss of privilege, there's loss of income. And I personally witnessed people go head on into that loss and lose clients who were not aligned to their vision for who they want in their communities.
See, I hear you say that, and I'm like, who would not support inclusion? Like, that's crazy to me. But so I'm like a little bit shocked to hear that, to be honest with you.
Have you not seen that?
I haven't. So
No.
I'm eager to learn more about that. Like, I can't imagine. Like, I mean, I'll be honest with you. In the moments where I've been like, where I've forgotten, right? Because it has been a little bit of time now. Where and I'm calling myself out on that. You know, being disconnected from it, like forgetting to read my white fragility book, like, you know, that sort of thing. It's more because it's more of like negligence and not having it top of mind, not because of fear of loss. I'm just calling myself out on that. You know, it wouldn't even occur to me that I would lose clients because of a stand for inclusion and justice and equality. Like that doesn't even add up to me. So that's just interesting to me.
I've lost friends.
Wow.
I've lost friends, and I did a post the other day that said my level of disappointment has been raised. Some of the things I'm reading and witnessing have been disappointing, but the fact that people are so stuck in being right as opposed to wanting to get it right has been hugely disappointing. And the reality for me as a Black woman, I don't really have that luxury of disconnecting from it. And I don't want to say I'm obsessed, but it's hard for me even when I intentionally want to disconnect from it. It's difficult for me. Like, I am making an attempt this weekend to be fully present in anniversary celebration and enjoying and gratitude. But yet when I see, and I'm really noticing how my way of being has changed, because it's the pain that's still there, the pain of people that will actually argue about it, that will actually, as the oppressor, tell the oppressed what they should and shouldn't do, and how they shouldn't what they should and shouldn't feel, how they shouldn't feel. And something's got to change, because it really is the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And my favorite quote, one of my favorite quotes in this climate, is of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., when he said, the rioting is the voice of the unheard. That's how we get to be seen and heard. And so many times we haven't felt seen, heard, and respected in these conversations, and are told that we don't see color, all lives matter, which is dismissive of the pain that we are feeling. And when you are immersed in this work as a Black person, you do see the amount of people who do not want to talk about it. Are we still talking about this? When can it be over? Let's move on, business as usual, because there's no urgency. They're not fighting for their lives like we are. Like, I was secretly, and I've never really shared this with anybody, but I have 2 daughters. And with each pregnancy, I was terrified of having a boy.
Wow.
Terrified, to the point where I think of it now, and I would have loved to have a little boy. But the fact that I would be in fear of my son's life as a Black man. My current husband is white, but my first husband was Black. And, even if I had a child with this husband, which I was willing to do, even though there was like no way I was going to go back in baby jail. I thought, well, he might have a better chance because he wouldn't look that Black.
Wow. Wow.
And, we did start the process of seeing if we could have a pregnancy. And then I just couldn't do it, because there's such a strong desire in me to have a son, to have had a son. But that ship has way sailed. But there was such a fear. And when, my daughter was married to a Black man, my other daughter's engaged to a Black man. And I'm just like, oh my God, I worry for them. I worry. And a white person will never be able to empathize with that.
Right.
They would never know that.
A different dimension.
Yeah. But what I'm seeking is compassion. Like, trust us when we say, this is real.
Right.
Not our imaginations. We are not causing this. And I'm not a fan of being a victim to it, but it's just really the reality of the situation is being Black in America is not a safe place to be. And I know you have the luxury of moving in and out, and I'm saying the universal you, so please don't hear me saying you specifically.
And me specifically. Yeah.
And I find that when people hear you specifically, that's when the defense comes up. So I'm really careful to say, you know what, if it lands for you, take it. If it doesn't, let it go. But you get the opportunity to really look at, I do have that luxury. I am given that privilege. And it's not meaning that you're privileged because you're rich or because you live in a certain community. You are privileged based on the color of your skin to move in and out of these conversations at will.
Right.
And decide, okay, now I can step in, and now I need a break, now I can step in. And I'm finding that for myself, I can't take a break. I feel bad, and I'll just be transparent with you. I have a white husband. Like, is he going to get tired of me always being in this work? And I always check in with him, like, how are you doing? And, thank God he's been my rock, and he's been a voice of, I don't want to say reason, but just someone I can bounce things off of, and who's not dismissive of my feelings and not accusing me of being in it too much. He really, is fully present with me in it and there when I need him, which is why I want to honor him with like at least a weekend of like, let's exhale a little bit. And I won't be on social media responding to every little thing and getting upset and needing a hug. I mean, he's probably never hugged me so much in his life. And my husband's German. He doesn't like to hug. I was like, it's my love language. You've got to give it to me. But my point in just sharing all of this is that when you see some comments that are being written by people who are minimizing the systemic racism in this country, know that when someone of color reads that, it's a dagger to the heart. And
I have a question about that. I'd love to ask a question about that, because that makes sense, and I can't even wrap my head around it. I can't even imagine. So, it's like that thing. I even though I can't even imagine, I still stand with you. Like, I definitely feel that way. But I do have a question, because I've noticed. I mean, I try to stay. There's so much political craziness right now, and I have had years where I completely was disengaged from the political dialogue, and I really regretted that. And so this year I'm choosing to be very engaged, and I do my best to not be biased. Like, I try to read absolutely everything, both sides, everything. Like, I want to be as well-rounded and educated as possible. And I've noticed that there's a contingent of Black people who've taken a stance that there is no systemic racism. Mm-hmm. And they're convicted around that. And mm-hmm. So I'm curious to know your point of view on that.
Well, there's a contingent of white people who think they are. There is. And so my point of view on that is that we're all people. We're all humans, and we all have different opinions of things in spite of our color, no matter our color. And so what comes up for me when I hear white people share that is like, why would you think we all think alike?
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It goes back to, when I would be at the beach and enjoying the rays of the sun, and white people would ask me, you get a sunburn? Does your skin burn? I have skin. If I put my hand in fire, it'll burn. I need to protect my skin. And so that, to me, when I hear that, really, I would invite you to know that there's Black people in the Republican parties, just like there's white people in the Democratic parties. I always took offense when people assumed I was liberal because I was Black. I am not liberal. I am not a liberal person. And, I look at politics not by party, I look at the people and what they're saying and who they are being. That's how I operate. And that's my personal choice. And not a lot of people could understand that. But you're Black. Aren't you supposed to be Democrat? Aren't you supposed to be liberal? And so I would say to any white person who is shocked that there are Black people in the Republican Party, Black people who do not see racism, I will tell you that we all grew up in systemic racism. I went to school and learned whitewashed history lessons just like you did.
Right.
I went to Catholic church and saw white hippie Jesus and the white angels, just like a lot of Christians did.
Yeah.
And so this is a learning experience for us too, to go back and see real history and look at it differently and see what really happened. So don't be surprised that everybody forms their own opinion based on their experiences and what they're learning, and no matter what their color is.
That's helpful. I have another question for you,
Mm-hmm.
if that's okay. Um, so one of the things that I've been tossing around in my head, and I haven't landed on in my heart, and I haven't landed on, I haven't settled with it yet, is the fact that, and this might be just like an open-ended question that we're not going to answer, but like I love America, I love our country. I think it's a great country, and the other about a month ago, Matt he like pulls up Hamilton to watch one evening, the play, and it was unbelievable. Like I was sobbing by the end of it, and it inspired me to do some research on the founding fathers and to just understand history a little bit more than I just to understand more. And so I was researching what was the intention of the founding fathers when they were creating this country, because I think that's a really relevant conversation these days. And so I found a book that George Washington wrote all about, like, for example, one of the things he said was he warned against partisanship. He saw issues coming with, like, when you create partisanship, like what that can create down the road. And that really resonated with me because I really take issue with a lot of the partisanship that's occurring right now. So I shared that on my social media just as like a warning and just like an observation. And someone responded and completely just basically in her response, my experience was it was like a discrediting of George Washington and his authority in anything he said because he was a slave owner and because so many of the founding fathers were slave owners. So the question is, how do we reconcile respect for the fact that these individuals literally created this country and then there was this like massive flaw in an aspect of what they created in this country? Like, how do we reconcile that?
I've thought about that a lot, not just with the founding fathers, but just in my travels when you are at historic landmarks and you read who discovered this and, how they beat back the indigenous people and then they're credited with building up the land and all of that. I have a real, I was just in Oregon now where the fires are. And reading a lot of the history of people who first came to those shores and how they developed the industries there. And I see it also differently now personally, because this land was actually stolen and built into America. That is what my eyes are opening to. And the founding fathers built the Constitution and everything from the eyes of a white patriarchal society. So, women have had their struggles in being equal and having equal rights as well in this country for a long, not that long ago. And so look at it from where it's at. Yes, we built America and it is what it is. I think there needs to be a lot of restitution. What's fortunate is Black people are not asking for restitution. We're just asking for equality and have justice. We're not asking a lot. I know the indigenous people have had it, I think, a really, really, I think I would feel differently if I were an indigenous person reading that, knowing that who came to our land and took it and then built it and then are exalted because of it. And so, yeah, there's a lot of reconciliation. Yeah, they did build the land, but they were flawed. And they did it from their perspective of a white patriarchal society, which is why the laws were built. I don't know if you saw the Netflix documentary 13th.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I just watched it with my dad, who's 87, and it was quite interesting to see his reaction to watching it, because like I said, we all grew up with the same history books and the same history lessons and really learning it at a deeper level. I think some things get to be reconciled at some point, but like I said, it's so ingrained into the fabric of the cloth that we were built in, that it would be seen as being un-American. So, honestly, I'll be quite honest with everybody who's watching this. I've actually been looking at how if I even want to stay in America.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are.
It's just, it doesn't feel the same for me, and I don't have the same amount of pride that I've always had. And depending upon what we decide to do as a country to correct some things that are just blatantly wrong, will determine where I spend the majority of my time in the future, as soon as the COVID restrictions are hopefully dealt with and lifted.
Yeah, that's completely fair. I really appreciate that response. That I hate to say I'm grateful for the tragedy and tragedies that have occurred. Like, I'm sad that that's what it took for these conversations to occur. However, I'm grateful for this conversation, and by this conversation, I mean generally, like specifically and generally, like I'm grateful for these conversations. And what you just said, Eva, is like that's so eye-opening and heart-opening. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot to consider, and I guess like what I'm experiencing is you're creating permission to think about and consider and discuss those things. And I appreciate that.
Yeah. We are in our infancy in this, really. That's how I see it, because the awakenings that are happening on both sides, I'm awakening. I have been guilty of supporting white fragility my entire life. I have a father who grew up in Jim Crow South, and to make white people feel uncomfortable meant death. And so you grow up, don't say anything, let it go, don't upset the white person. Imagine that. Having microaggressions, macroaggressions, things said that are clearly from a place of privilege that are insulting to you, but not to say anything for fear of upsetting a white person. Because in the South, that had consequences. And so I grew up with a father from the South, always, don't say anything, let it go. So the resiliency that comes up, the resiliency that's built in Black women in general, is like none other I've ever seen.
That came up in another conversation I had with a woman who actually, Janine Staples, who, you know her, right?
Yeah, she was in my Allyship Awareness Forum. She was a speaker on that live forum I did for allies. Yeah.
Yeah, so she's an expert. She literally, her life is devoted to this. She's an academic and prestigious researcher, and she has thousands and thousands of testimonies. And what you just said is the first thing she said to me in our conversation: the resiliency of Black women. It is like nothing you've ever seen before.
Nothing. Between how we've had to worry about our men, how our men have been taken away from us, how we've had to keep the families together, how we work so hard. I see it like right now, I'm wearing my mother's wedding ring and my grandmother's engagement ring. I just found my mother's wedding ring. I was just back home. And I'm thinking of their stories, their history, their resilience, to the fact that we're complacent about our resilience. It's so built into us that we don't realize it. Because it's natural to us. And so the fragility, so we get to pull down that resiliency at some point, to a point where we say, no, that's not okay. That's not acceptable, and speak up more.
Yeah.
That's what I'm noticing in myself, because, we're so used to being resilient. And so maybe our resilience has led to some complacency in some areas in our lives that we get to look at. And from the white person or the non-Black person's or white perceived person's perspective, look at the fragility. Like, why are my knickers such in a twist about this? So like, what does that mean? Why is this happening to me when people are just asking to have an equal opportunity and to be treated fairly in the justice system? Why does this have me all up in arms? Why am I throwing up all this deflection? Well, there's Black on Black crime, and you notice if you don't commit a crime, the police won't do that. That is so not true. the amount of people that have been killed just for walking down the street in a wrong neighborhood because you're Black and don't belong. I always feel like I don't belong because I'm always the only Black person, but I'm going to breathe because I can get really, jacked up about this stuff. But it really is just creating a space to look at how you've been shaped by the forces of racism, how it shows up in your life, and really just look at it intimately and honestly. And let's, like, we said in the beginning, we're coming from two different ends of the world, but we all want to take that journey to come together and finally exhale. And like, we figured it out. We did it.
Well, and just circling back to the fact that today is September 11th, ultimately, I mean, I remember I was in high school. I was sitting in assembly. I was young. I was a kid. I didn't know anyone. I didn't, like, I was in the Midwest in St. Louis, but that didn't diminish the pain that I felt. I didn't even understand that I felt. Like, I felt the country cry. I also felt very helpless. And I think that was also a big part of, even then, like, I was a kid, but like, kids are powerful too, and it was hard to feel helpless. And so I'm bringing that to the attention because nobody's ever helpless. Nobody's ever helpless. Like, we can always do something. We can always be something. And I think what I'm hearing you say right there, that I just really want to, like, land in a powerful way for those who've reaped the benefits of white privilege, is have the consciousness and the awareness to just notice. Like, be open, be humble, be conscious, be aware, and just notice. Don't react, notice. And then respond from a place of intention. What's my stand? And consciousness. That's really what I'm taking away from this conversation and what you've said.
Thank you, my dear. Thank you for joining us on the Intimacy of Race and Coffee and Conversations. I really appreciate you and appreciate your openness in having this conversation. I think this was really powerful. And so thank you.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll be back next Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern with more Coffee and Conversations. Until then, guys, let us honor those whose lives were lost in 9/11, the heroes who fought in 9/11, the heroes who cleaned up. I remember that day so specifically. I remember the first responders that were patients of mine and what they were finding, and just such a surreal day, never to be forgotten. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.